Okay, so yeah, as I said, it'll be a short meeting. I'm like grossly underprepared because I'm in the middle of a move, but I think it's a cool paper to talk about, and it's a cool problem to talk about, right? So clock synchronization, is pretty much a problem since since the beginning of distributed computing, right? When you have more than one clock, and how do you synchronize between them? Obviously, if we have perfectly synchronized clocks, we can solve a lot of problems a lot easier and faster, right? So this paper kind of motivates the need for synchronized clock with the with strongly consistent applications, whatever that means. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if you have good clocks, the synchronization comes cheaper. And we have seen quite a few papers actually in this reading group that talk that leverage good clock synchronization, like they assume really good clock synchronization to get some benefits, right? To try to improve the performance, like in state machine replications and whatnot. So most clock synchronization papers that we've read in this group and kind of out there, they really focus on the synchronization part, right? And they don't really focus so much on like what happens if the synchronization fails, right? Like how good our clocks are, in case you can no longer synchronize it, over the network for whatever reason, right? And it can be like a very transient failure, and it's a big problem because a lot of the modern clock synchronization protocols, they require synchronization a lot of the times. Like the clocks is resynchronized many times a second, right? So I believe we covered a paper before called Sundial, yeah, a bunch of other papers and systems as well. They they will require all kinds of interesting setups. Some will run on like dedicated networks just for clock synchronizations, right? If you have a network that's not congested, then you can control essentially you can get your bound on time synchronization quicker because you're getting like less noise from the network, from your packets being buffered at switches and so on and so forth, right? So if you have uncongested like network specifically for time synchronization, you can do really good clock synchronization. But what if that fails, right? Like what if you expect to synchronize this clock like so often, and you're not running in those ideal conditions, right? Or these ideal conditions disappear. Well, you start losing your synchrony, right? But how badly do you actually lose it? And this paper, kind of tries to investigate, how bad the clocks are, how bad the oscillators are in the service that we use, and can we actually, use those oscillators in a kind of smarter way? Let me see. Yeah, so they talk about some background. The important part is this, hold on. Yeah, this paper right here. There are different sources in which the error can creep in the oscillators in the clocks that we use at the servers. Some of the things are kind of completely beyond our control. The tolerance, that's just like the manufacturing process, the crystal cut. This is not something that we can control, but this like tolerance, whatever the deviation from expected frequency of the oscillator, this is kind of static for a particular oscillator, so it can be easily learned and adjusted for. They also talk about aging. Aging introduced some error, right? As the oscillator ages, it starts to give a little bit more error. But then again, these are kind of things that are decently easy, like fairly easy to calculate and estimate for and account when you rely on this oscillator to keep your time. So most of the work in that paper is focused on the temperature aspect. And as we know, as we discussed in the previous papers, this clock oscillators, they change their frequency slightly when you hit them up or cool them down, right? So you know, for example, as the server goes through different workloads, or you know, it may warm up, it may cool down a little bit, right? So like these temperature variations actually introduce the clock skew, right? They introduce like make the oscillator go at different speed, and yeah, essentially the source of an error. So the big chunk of this paper is really you know, talking about this, like the fact that our clocks, you know, they're not as unstable as you know, we think they are, right? The biggest source of variability is temperature. All other sources of variability are either very little or you know, easy to account for. So yeah, they talk about clocks and sensors, which is yeah, pretty much what I described a little bit, and the temperature. And yeah, the bottom line, I guess, you know, to summarize what they try to do is they try to learn those frequency temperature curves for a particular clock, right? For a particular oscillator. So you know, in each server there is an oscillator. Actually, you know, more than one that keeps time, for that matter. And the paper talks about different oscillators that you know, can be used for timekeeping at you know, the server level. But they all have kind of the same problem, right? With the temperature, their frequency, you know, slightly changes. And you know, if we can learn, you know, this frequency curve for each individual oscillator on each individual server, then we can account for that, right? We can say, okay, you know, the server is running at, you know, this temperature. So based on this curve, you know, we can expect this error, and we can try to account for this error. Now, there are obvious challenges to this. You know, how do you measure the temperature of the oscillator, right? So the servers have all kinds of sensors, but usually there is not going to be like a sensor placed directly, a temperature sensor placed directly on the oscillator. So, you know, the temperature measurement is not necessarily correct. But I guess if it's, you know, good enough, right? If it's close enough to the oscillator, and you know, this sensor, this temperature sensor has good correlation with the temperature of an actual oscillator, you can still use it to build the curve. Now, how do they actually, you know, find this curve, right? Because you need to know, you know, your error by comparing it to some kind of reference, right? And for that, they use PTP or even NTP, like any kind of network synchronized protocol. They use it as a reference. And then they see, you know, how much adjustment compared to this reference, right? So if they synchronize with PTP between 2 points, right, they check two PTP timestamps and see also how much, you know, the actual oscillator moved, right? And they can adjust, like they can find that little difference between what PTP tells you, how much time has elapsed, and what your local oscillator tells you. And you repeat it like a bunch of times over and over and over and over and over again, and you know, you can arrive to this curve. And yeah, they mostly talk about PTP, you know, because it's a very good source of time synchronization. But they also, yeah, need to keep scrolling. They also evaluate it with NTP time, which is kind of your day-to-day, everyday, you know, time synchronization protocol. And they pretty much say that they can learn the same curves. They can find the same curves for each particular oscillator, even using NTP synchronization. But it will take longer time, right? So, but you know, if you have enough time, you can find this curve for an oscillator and essentially use it to adjust time synchronization, to adjust you know, your local timekeeping. And if you have good local timekeeping that doesn't drift as much, like if you can account for all of these sources of variability, then you no longer need to resynchronize the time, like many thousands of times per second, right? Like you don't have to constantly do it. B, if you, skip one or two synchronization attempts because of some transient issues, some, network glitches and whatnot, you still kind of going to be probably within the tolerance of your software. And speaking of the tolerance of the software, they claim that they can be they can maintain the time precision, the precision like way more tolerant than is required by Google Spanner. I think the number that they say is like 2,000 times more tight bound than what is required by Spanner. So, and that's great, right? Like Spanner uses GPS and atomic clocks and, runs the PTP protocol all the time. And here we can just use, our local clocks as soon as we account for all of this variability and get, kind of better performance from our time without the need for this, I guess, expensive and complicated hardware. And
so there's a philosophical question though. In Spanner, you're getting a time and an error bound.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then you can make decisions with correctness by trusting the error bound. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting work, super interesting. And so my presumption is that AWS True Time or the time sync is going to kind of do this or similar kinds of things. Okay. And so what that'll mean is it will, have better and better and better times moving forward. But it's not telling you accurately a time bound. And so the question is, how do you think about the philosophy behind your protocol? Are you guaranteeing based upon the time, or are you performing better based on the time? And personally, I'm very interested in algorithms which use happen before messaging to be correct perfectly, but the better the time aligns, the better their performance. And this is phenomenal for that.
Yeah,
but that's kind of a discussion. This is not giving error bounds.
Well, in part, I guess, because essentially it needs to learn it for every single oscillator.
Of course, it does.
So every single oscillator and the quality of this learning will also be different, right? So essentially you have, maybe you can have an error bound for a particular oscillator of some sort, but then if you have a distributed system with, 100,000 machines or whatever, Google Spanner scale, right? Then probably not going to have one.
Well, you can't actually have the protocols where you're making decisions at higher than the speed of light because they're distributed that much. With the error bounds and trusting the atomic clock for the error bound, you could choose to do that. And so bifurcating the discussions is part of what falls out of this in my mind. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Quite frankly, when I read it, I didn't think about like a global time bound, but yeah.
Well, no, but it's just a philosophy. It's a question, right? Are we going, and I am fond of algorithms that use honest to God happened before, but I'm guessing a time. I'm using my assumptions about your synchrony to accurately guess the time to reduce the latency, yada, yada, yada. But it's still the message tells God, the honest to gosh truth. And the time of being aligned makes it faster. That's different than the gosh truth comes from the atomic clocks and the GPS. And so I know your time is within this error bound. And so that isn't a discussion I think we haven't dug into, but this stuff's kind of new.
Yeah, but how do you know, like in the Spanner system? Yeah, you have the GPS, you have this, atomic clock, time servers, right? Like I don't know, an atomic clock per a rack or two of servers. Still, how do you know that you like never blow your?
I don't know, but the correctness of the algorithm and the being corrupted is corrupted if it blows it.
Yeah. So quite frankly, I think what Google Spanner says. Hey, this is what we expect. Probably in the time synchronization that they get with the GPS and atomic clocks and running PTP in this like small networks, at the rack level or whatnot. They probably like calculate that, the probability of this is going to be such small that you're going to blow past that bound.
Well, but it's at some point probabilities turn into dependencies and certainties, which turns into the deterministic Swiss clock discussion. You saw my recent, you've seen the early review of my recent stuff on that paper on that. And so I'm pointing out that there is a deterministic belief in the spanner atomic clocks, and upon that we're building a deterministic correctness. And so the question becomes, how do we base the foundation of that determinism? And that's okay. I'm actually not opposed to it. It's a discussion. And in this with Graham, if you have an algorithm which just performs better with tight alignment, which is very interesting, but typically it's smaller geometries like within a region, within a 3AZ region, it's a different discussion. That's all I was trying to point out.
Like, and there are lots of work right now that is essentially focusing on, hey, if we have good time synchronization, we can do a lot better.
Perform better.
Perform better, like
correct.
And sometimes not even perform better in terms of like latency. There are we read the papers that will perform, like they will still sacrifice the latency, but they'll perform better in terms of throughput.
I'm a little lost about what you're saying with that. Why does the time alignment do better for throughput?
So there is a Paxos flavor called ePaxos, and it works much better if you have some kind of hidden synchronization going on.
Yeah, because the probability of the time guesses and the probability of the bidding
then if you have a well-synchronized clock, then you can say that, okay, because it's
the liveness guesses.
It's well-synchronized clock and a good estimate on the latency between the machines. If you know these two things, then you can say, okay, I'm going to wait for, I'm going to delay working on this message for this amount of time so that I can have a chance to receive, or so this message can propagate to other machines, so that I can kind of form the quorum and go with the fast quorum. So it will actually in many situations will sacrifice your latency because you're introducing those delays, but it will go through a fast quorum and will get higher throughput.
I know what you're saying. The probability of it matching with that is better, and so the aggregate throughput, but it's still a probability. It's still a probabilistic.
And at the end, of course, if time synchronization is out of whack, or the latency between the machines is screwed up because whatever your transient glitches in the network, then you fall back to this more traditional way, and
So, but how often are these solutions built on top of TCP, which has got its own time out retry bullshit?
Honestly, the big question is how often these solutions actually been built.
No shit, I get it. I mean, I'm continually finding people who are surprised that TCP actually has a retry timeout. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff is, weaving together into what is the nature of our distributed system solution. Are we optimizing latency versus, throughput versus blah, blah, blah. And just trying to couch it in terms of this. But again, the interesting thing about Spanner is this predicating assumption of distribution and synchrony faster than the speed of light can verify. And would you take a solution like Graham and have correctness depend upon that alignment of clocks? I'm just pointing it out.
We had this discussion, I guess, with you the other day, right? On different sects, right? So if you're deterministic, then you probably should not even trust Spanner for that matter.
But the deterministic people kind of looked it up in their database book and said, "Oh, gee, that's an accepted database solution," and so now I put it in my category of my religious
because they've been told, okay, this will be deterministic, right? They don't study, they don't look like.
I get it.
How does it actually find those uncertainties, right? Can you 100% like deterministically find those uncertainties? No.
Well, correct, but look, I misspent decades of my youth believing that pseudo-synchronous networking was synchronous networking and then fail fast. And so it's exactly the same discussion. Am I putting on blinders and pretending so that I can have a solution that works given I'm pretending, but the probabilities are so low that it doesn't seem to cause bugs too often. And just pointing it out, just pointing out all this weaves together.
So coming back to your previous question, would I trust, this solution over, I guess over spanners? I think with the high degree of probability that, it will
Nobody's yet done probability of correctness.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know I would absolutely trust it in combination with a happen before correction.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. But I don't know what to think about comparing and contrasting the dependency on it, the way many of us are depending on true time and spanner. It's a fun philosophical discussion.
Yeah. At the end, right? If you can figure out, if you trust, philosophically speaking, if you trust the system, then like how different it is from using atomic clocks.
I don't know. Yeah. Do we trust that cosmic rays don't make undetected error changes to your DRAM? Undetected.
Yeah. There was a paper from Google, I think, that they talk about the CPUs that kind of miscompute, right? And trying to figure out when and how the CPUs miscompute, right? Again, but we put our trust in the CPU, right? We put our trust all the time that it's a deterministic machine. It will do the same thing over and over and over again. And what they found out is that you have the CPU, the core, it works fine for a couple of months, and then it stops and it miscomputes on some instruction, on some data, and
it's usually right.
Yeah, mostly right. It used to be right. Now the same device is not right, and then you heat it up or cool it down, and then it becomes right again. For example, right?
When I know you've seen all of the gray failures research. I know you have, right? And so it's like, like how much trust do you actually need, right? In the CPU paper, they talk about actually quite a big number of quite large frequency of the CPU failures. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it was like one core in few thousands or something. That's a very big error rate for something that we believe is deterministic all the time and kind of like it cannot crash, right? Like it has to work. Like it's a very big error rate, and we seem to be fine. I don't think you and I've talked about my philosophy that actually, non-volatile memory is bad, because creating things that survive persistence boundaries, in my opinion, should have to go through an IO driver. They should have to go through some software that you will crash if you screw up, to put it on disk, to put it on the network. And so if you don't, then you can have this corruption pollute. And so this is a philosophical debate of Heisenberg's and probabilities, and did the thing have to pass an SAT test in order to get the message out? And that's a probabilistic reduction in pollution. So it's all riffed off of very similar things to what you just raised.
Yeah. So Sheriff, I think you raised your hand. Do you want to?
Oh my gosh, I want to see a face. Is there a face there besides Alexei's?
There might be faces, but I can't have kids behind me, so like you'll see so many faces.
Okay, fine.
But let me actually open the camera. So actually, hi. So I have a question. Like I have a follow-up question on the philosophy for like using time synchronization, particularly. Is it possible to say that if we have a protocol that uses virtual clocks, that protocol will perform better if we have clock synchronization, like more accurate clock synchronization?
So let's take apart what you're saying. I want to make sure I'm repeating back so I hear you. Virtual clocks means some message carried knowledge, which correlated the interaction of these computers.
Yeah, like something like vector clocks.
Of course, yeah, fine.
Yeah, that's right. And is it actually plausible to say that if we have a protocol that uses vector clocks to maintain something like orders and things like that, will it perform better if we have more accurate physical clock synchronization? Like, is it actually a correct scientific statement?
So, Alexi, you want to answer that? You want me to?
Well, I think we kind of touched on this in the discussion, right? Clock synchronization is faster than light. Message passing is, the speed of light. So, if your protocol is designed for message passing, purely message passing, right? Then, why do you care? Like, if you're using this.
Let me cut in for a sec, if you don't mind. If I'm going to send a message passing which says, I want you to do this work when you get to this time. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
And there are many cases we're seeing. I want to guess a time at which you're going to do it. We're all do it at the same logical time because we're going to align our physical times. And please do this when you get to this time. Okay, and we're seeing that in distributed algorithms emerging as a pattern. Okay, so if I'm saying, would you please do this when you get to 10 o'clock? And I could say 10:50, 9:59, I could say 9:50, whatever. I'm trying to pick a time so that it's not a very high chance that you tell me, oh, dude, I was already past that time. I can't do it at that time. So now if I can guess that time with both a combination of network latency and knowledge of your time, the better my guess, the faster we can align and make progress.
Yeah, but if you say that do this work when the vector clock reaches 10, it's not really 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. Just like message number 10, like event number 10. Now, with the physical synchronization, do we have less chance that the server will wait longer until 10 actually happen, or we figure out that 10 actually happen?
Depends what the semantic of the vector clock is.
Right.
If the vector clock is just counting, then it doesn't really matter. If the vector clock is performing it when it's aligned with the same knowledge of what's happened before and what's happened after. The question is, we have partial order, or what's the boundary of overlap in the partial order, and how do we narrow that? And so time clocks can actually help with that. And the discussion that Alexi and I were having up to this is, Spanner actually says, I'm going to slot my time at the same time as you're going to slot your time on the other continent, even though speed of light is faster than our confusion about the time.
Right.
Because we assume the atomic clock is going to be aligned within those error bounds. Okay, this is a different game.
Right.
Every individual clock's in its own little world, and the question is, how accurate is that, so that allows me to guess? But that's, I'm pointing out, it depends upon the nature of your distributed algorithm. Is the distributed algorithm guessing on time alignment, or is the distributed algorithm predicated on a perfect knowledge of time alignment? And then Spanner has its error bounds.
Yes.
Did I say that okay, Alexi?
Yeah. I just want to kind of for the question specifically, right? If your algorithm, the way I see it, if your algorithm was designed, just for this logical times, like vector clock, right? Logical counters, then there is not going to be a benefit from this faster than light kind of communication, right? But if you are smart, if you say let's do this at some time that's not
correlated to clock time,
that's not driven by you exchanging the messages explicitly, right? Then you can get the benefit.
Nice.
Spanner assumes that it can reduce the partialness of the partial order by counting on the atomic clocks being aligned. So they can actually do it faster than you can squirt messages back and forth, because speed of light doesn't let you squirt messages at that distance that quickly. So that's in one category. And Alexi and I were just talking about, are we fooling ourselves depending upon atomic clocks or not?
Right.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
This is fun philosophical stuff, and the whole community is like scratching our head. What the hell do we really think?
Yeah,
And
yeah, I get that. So yeah, I was asking about like is it like is there actually a way to scientifically close the philosophy, like to prove that
hell no.
Something is impossible? Let's say, like if you say that it's impossible that you'll be faster than the because you like. This is a wrong scientific statement. But if you say that if it is impossible that you will be faster than the speed of light, then it's impossible that you will reach an error that works all the time. But there is a probability that is somehow accepted for this error, and we will live with it. And
that is a philosophical question that my paper that's under edit is confronting as a philosophical question.
I see. Okay.
It's the paper is about 2 weeks out from ACMQ, and it's called "I'm Probably Less Deterministic Than I Used to Be."
Okay.
And it's this is an existential question, and my belief is that human beings will gravitate into arguments at a finer or a coarser grain depending upon outside attack. And so distributed systems people will combine into their own little narrow little debates until somebody from the outside comes, and then they'll cling together. Did that make sense when I said that, Alexi?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I know that's not a satisfactory answer, and thanks for turning on the camera. It's way better.
Yeah. There is a lot of philosophy going on here. Like,
I'm just laughing. I liked your summary. I kind of had gotten that already. I knew this stuff from reading it, but
Yeah.
I'm just trying to position it in my head about what I think. And fundamentally, I think these techniques are going to gravitate into the substrate providers so that, time sync out of Amazon will get better because they'll look at this, say, hey, let's try this stuff, and it'll get better and better. And so when you're in a cloud environment, you have a very good chance that the clocks are very good, even better than Spanner moving forward in a couple of years.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, count on that.
What I like here, right, is that it doesn't need those atomic clocks.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it doesn't need those GPS, synchronization. Like, I don't know, like back a few years back, I tried to play it with a GPS synchronized a time server that has an overnight oscillator. So, not an atomic, but, it's temperature controlled essentially, right? It tries to remove that variability. But yeah, I mean, it's cool to have, this time, but, my personal experience, of course, I'm not in a data center, right? So I'm like trying to stick out this like GPS antenna out of the window somewhere to get the signal, and it was such a pain in one place to find to actually synchronize the time with the GPS. I mean, obviously Google's and all of them, they don't have these problems, but it's like, I don't know.
I'm going to repeat back to you in completely different words why I like Graham. Okay, this seemed like a non sequitur, and I'll wrap it around. Do you know why it's cheaper to buy a printer that has a scanner than it is to buy a printer without a scanner?
Gosh, that's another philosophical question. I don't know.
Because they can manufacture really crappy print head alignment, and you print a test page and they scan it. And the software then compensates for the really crappy printhead alignment to make a crisp and perfect picture as you print after repairing for the crappy printhead alignment. Graham is saying, I do not need an accurate oscillator because I can compensate for the oscillator.
Yeah.
Did that make sense as a parallel?
Yeah. That's exactly what it.
So you might as well go for the cheap shit hardware because the software can tone it up. But it still doesn't cut to that underlying question of, do we depend upon it? And if you believe it's a probability distribution of the accuracy of a Graham synchronized clock, Graham aligned clock, okay, well, gee, can I count on the time frames of 2 out of 3 or 5 out of 9? Can I use quorums to dampen the outliers? And when does that take me into a probabilistic assumption that I can use it to build a correct database out of?
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I making sense when I talk this stuff?
Yeah. Like I believe it's a probability, right? I just
Right, but
hope that we can get to a level where this, probability of making a mistake is so low that it doesn't matter.
right, but you talk to people and they're working on time
Yeah.
alignment, and then they're running on top of TCP.
Yeah.
And and our team just bumbled into this. Oh shit! How come we go 200 milliseconds every once in a while? The answer is you drop the packet, and TCP had to retry.
And that's why you need to have a good marketing team, like Spanner, to sell your probability as certainty.
Okay. I don't know if you expected the discussion to go down this rat hole, but I hope it was useful. You silent guys with names and a Spider-Man, was this useful to you guys? Nobody's out there even going to participate.
Oh, I think I have to kind of try to wrap up because I still need to finish my U-Haul.
Good luck with the moving. I totally get it. I'm going to have it soon again. And so
yeah, it's a disaster.
No, it's not. You'll be fine. It's annoying. You'll be fine.
Annoying.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I hope it was interesting. I enjoy talking to Alexei all the time, so it's great.
Yeah. Nice having you, Pat, and nice having everyone.
Thanks for joining.
I think next week we have some other interesting paper. And hopefully I'm not presenting, so it will be a better presentation.
What's the paper, do you know?
I'm looking it up. Understanding, detecting, and localizing partial failures in large distributed systems.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Hope to see you all and more next week.
Thanks.